Sir Henry Vane, also known as King Henry X of England, who came to America as the 5th governor of the Massachusetts Bay Colony, right on the frontier of all English, which was very difficult at the time because the Dutch West India Company was in Albany and New Amsterdam. And in his time here, he founded Harvard University in what has got to be seen as like a divine miracle, where he took covenant from King Henry II, who founded Cambridge University and started a new college, is what he described it as he passed the bill, that ended up being in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And he's like, well, I didn't want it named the same thing. And so it ended up being named Harvard University. He also founded Rhode Island. He modernized the British Navy based on a vision he had called shapelessness, which was calculus. Before Isaac Newton, he was able to build the navy that defeated the Dutch. The British Empire, of which the sun never set on, originated from Sir Henry Vane's illumination of a ship that was shapeless in the water. And so he happens to be this incredibly important person. When he came to the Bay Colony, he hoisted a flag, an ancient flag, which has been described as the Cross of St. George. That Cross of St. George has Sir Henry Vane covenant. You know it today, where it's in the Red Cross. We're in, BLS trained professionals, paramedics, lifeguards, firefighters. That's part of a tradition of medicine, of keeping the heart going, of keeping the parasympathetic nervous system going, to be specific. That is a true medical specialty we recognize and lead and expect in the ancient Jagphetic tradition. In the Sir Henry Vane tradition and that Kent English tradition. It happens to be incredibly important because the Kerdic medicine traces to the neurosystem of, the Kerdic nerves, of the heart. That's a separate system from the rest of the nervous system of the body that deserves to have a very clear and specific neurosystem-defined medical specialty. Happens to be really important where the enteric system has been broken away from the parasympathetic nervous system, and our knowledge of anatomy has changed. Diffusion, importantly, doesn't explain the Homo sapien physiology in the Kerdic nervous system. It's a quantum finding. There's quantum physics findings in how our body moves nutrients down through our body. Vitamin K2 is so critical, for example, in the placement of calcium in our body, and yet the foodborne parasites that produce vitamin K2 are sort of disguised and difficult for our body to discover, which is one of the key problems because blockages in the Kerdic system originate from calcium upstream, going back in time, and the placement of that calcium, which is a nutrient-intervened placement, is a solvable problem. It's something that will have to be solved by looking intimately at the neurosystems, how our body's not able to discover a parasite emitting K2, and how our body can become self-reliant in K2, which is so important. Myocarditis is also known as inflammatory cardiomyopathy, are viral infections that can be diagnosed wrongly. Again, the discovery that there are parasites involved in things like asthma, COPD, and congestive heart failure is so important, actually, in how we view primary prevention and how we view secondary prevention. The primary care of the Kerdic nervous system is one of the most important things. Having that specialty called out all the way back at the medical school and residency level seems so critical, where patient compliance is really the key problem, which requires motivational interviewing and being able to get behavior change out of patients, which is a fundamentally different thing than the current practice of medicine. The parasympathetic nervous system has what's called craniosacral outflow. That happens to be fundamentally different than the enteric system. It happens to be fundamentally different than the sympathetic nervous system. And so aligning the medical specialties by neurosystem is a more rational way to organize, like residencies, like medical specialties, even medical schools. And the only reason we haven't done it is that the canon of ancient Jagphetic medicine originated from healers that organized medicine based on setting. So we have specialties organized by primary care, by specialty care, internal medicine subspecialties, surgical care, hospital care, and that organization doesn't actually lead to cures. We did have a nice run-up of doubling life expectancy in the last 100 years or so, since our current change in health medical training. But that next level of medical training that eliminates all illness and all parasites actually requires a narrowing and focusing and subspecializing down at the neurosystem level, because our bodies, when trained to do well, will outperform parasites. We know that we can win that battle. We choose to win that battle. That's part of what Kerdic Medical Specialty is meant to do. Lead and Expect is a quality improvement methodology that's not based on trucks, it's not based on cell phones, it's not based on cars, like a lot of other quality management systems, and it unifies quality and finance. It also unifies all of the medical and non-medical professions out in industry under one medical science, which is so critical to have basically a caste system where tobacco producers, vaping producers are underneath a medical science, a medical specialty, as are firefighters, paramedics, lifeguards, the good guys. Because see, if we don't put industry non-medicine players under a medical science and under a medical lens, we end up not eliminating things like tobacco and opioids, and we really must. And so we choose this new Jagiellonian law of the Kerdic Medical Specialty as one of the offerings in Lead and Expect, the quality improvement method that I've published in a couple of my books now. Due to popular demand, we put out a new book, Jagiellonian Law, and the old law of horse shepherds, which is instructive. We've been an important part of, despite, our tribe is like 3 or 4 million people the whole world over. When you look in Testament, you see writing of horse shepherds and writing from horse shepherds. Some of the things about the Jagiellonian law of Kerdic Medical Specialty include the biological alphas of species. It's a, and I elaborate on this in the Jagiellonian law. There's a physiological accepted accounting principles where there are model organisms. You can think of a flock of birds. You can think about a flock of horses, sheep, and the alpha pattern that it's described well by E.O. Wilson and other observers. There is in nature a like a model organism that defines the physiology. One of the key findings in this Kerdic medical specialty is that diffusion doesn't actually explain our physiology. When you learn in medical science or in medical school, for those of you that got to medical school, that diffusion is the engine of morphology, you have to really look at what diffusion is. If our bodies never had some method, some mechanical way, some biological alpha, some model organism defining a diffusion, right? The ways that our body ebbs into those entropies to create new organs, because there's a changing of our species by biological alpha, and that happens to be old law. That's Jagiellonian law. That's Horse Shepherd law. That you change the flock from the model organism. That's how morphology happens, and there's biological alphas at the top of each species, the whole world over. And so that happens to be an important part of Kerdic medicine, is that diffusion happens to not. Diffusion is the non-finding that diffusion could explain everything, and then the rest is just genetic mutations, is something that has to be contested, because that idea hasn't resulted in cures in Kerdic medicine. And so it's looking at the physiological accepted accounting principles of morphology. Again, the bookkeeping of morphology, the bookkeeping of speciation. the parasite reduction in some of these Kerdic diseases requires 4 or more we call blocks. I elaborate on that in my book, Metabolic Topology. It's so important. 4 natural blocks is the ancient, Jagphetic knights and kings ways of fighting against natural and supernatural means. Why does 4 matter? It comes out of queuing science, which some of you could reference in telephone queuing math out of Agner Erlang, out of the Copenhagen, Denmark telephone company, over 100 years ago, that discovered that you really need 4 or more switchboard operators to be able to gain scale. And that comes from an old body of queuing knowledge, it's factorial math. And that factorial math is actually so important because the method of disease eradication requires 4 systems of blocks, 4 switchboards. And that happens to be part of why we haven't eradicated disease. Now, why does it require 4? Well, there's the quantum finding that these infectious diseases in the Kerdic nervous system they're a quantum persistence. Because see, our body should tag them and bag them. I mean, our biology knows how to tag and bag parasites and mark them as foreign, and don't. And again, our other explanations haven't resulted in cures. And if you look back to 2014, life expectancy has actually waned in America, and so it's time for us to have these new medical sciences break out as part of leading expect. These medical specialties would be at top of the caste system of those that do work relative to the Kerdic system, from vaping and smoking all the way up, through paramedics, firefighters, lifeguards, and folks like nurses. And so we want you to join us with our patient diagnosis compliance program, which we've done in the field for back since 2008. And we've done patient diagnosis compliance work all over America. We have this fundamental belief that we have the best physicians the whole world over, and that we don't have the most patient compliant the whole world over, and we can change that. And that's a new kind of medicine. It's a new kind of medical specialty, and that's what we're trying to build in the leading expect Jagphetic movement in the old Hippocratic tradition of horse shepherds. So join us at Profi.me.